It's terrible. But I wanted today, since we're going to talk a little bit about history, I wanted us to really feel like we were in the shtetls of Eastern Europe and, the bone-chilling cold of what, I wanted to right. So, the dreary Polish,
You succeeded now.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's a nightmare. I hate being cold so much that, when I first interviewed for jobs, I interviewed at 10 different congregations. And it's different now, but it used to be that the representatives of the synagogues would come to Cincinnati, which is where the rabbinic school was, and you could interview with whichever one you wanted. But you only had 5 days or 6 days to then go visit. So you could interview with as many as you want, and that was like Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday is this day that you are in dread of from the moment you enter rabbinic school, because that's the day you either get calls back from those synagogues or you don't. You wait for 5 years for that one morning to see if the phone's going to ring. So I wake up that Thursday, and 9 out of the 10 called me back. And then right as I was ready to go out to lunch, the 10th one called. So 3 of them were in Chicago. And I had 10 options to go visit cities, and 3 of them were in Chicago. So the rabbi gets on the phone. He said, "We'd like to invite you to come. Here's what you're going to do. We're inviting these people, and we're arranging a flight for you. You'll all come together on the same flight, and we'll pick you up." And I said, "Hang on a second. I'm not coming." He said, "What?" And I told him, "Too cold, too big, too expensive. I'm out."
But great people.
Yeah,
Great people.
Who cares? I mean, it's freezing. So where did we accept to go? We also said no to St. Louis and
Great place.
3, 4. There was one other one we said no to. Can't remember what it was. I used to know them all. So the ones we said yes to were Cincinnati, because we were right there, and I didn't want to go there, but one of my professors made me at least take a look at the one synagogue there. Charlotte, where we ended up going, Dallas, Texas, Alexandria, Virginia, and New Jersey, because it was right outside of Philadelphia. Actually, the other one I said no to was Philadelphia, not because it wasn't a great temple, but because the senior rabbi was just starting. It was his first year. And I didn't want to go somewhere where there wasn't a rabbi who was already comfortable and had time to mentor me. I figured he'd be busy making his own way, wouldn't have time to mentor me. So we prescribed. But the other one was close to Philly, which is where all my family was. So Jody and I narrowed it down to Dallas and Charlotte. And we ended up putting Charlotte first. And we got to Charlotte. And we're from Pennsylvania and Ohio. We'd never even been to North Carolina. So we get to Charlotte and we say, "It's freezing here. I thought this was the deep south. This is ridiculous. We can't even walk our dog. It's so cold." So, the difference between Charlotte and Pennsylvania, the only really difference is April and maybe September are still nice. So it shortens the winter, but the winter is still horrible. So we said, we got to get to Florida. This is ridiculous. And that's how. But I hate being cold. When I was growing up, every Sunday, all the kids would go, the JCC had a program where all the kids would go skiing. And I would just sit in the lodge. I'd go one run, I'm like, I'm out. My feet are freezing, my toes are freezing, I don't like heights. I was terrified of the ski lift. So, now people say they're moving. To me, anything north of Orlando is like Siberia. I can't even, you know. So, my son's starting to look at college. He's like, what about Atlanta? Freezing. Take it off. No, take it off. Orlando, and, maybe Gainesville, maybe. Probably gets cold there too. Who needs it? Okay, so, all right, enough about me. Okay, so when I first got here, Trump was president, first time. And the world that we lived in was a lot different than the world we lived in now. And so what I thought would be fun to do today, in the spirit of all the 10th anniversary and all this stuff, which is what I was thinking about at the time that I came up with the topic for this class. Now I don't want to talk. Now I see pictures of myself and I'm like, even I'm sick of this guy. It's like enough already. But I thought I'd spend some time talking about where we've come as Beth Am over 10 years, but walking along the same path of where the world and the Jewish world has come over 10 years, and how those two have played a role, how those two have intertwined. In other words, how has Temple Beth Am grown or evolved over the 10-year period that was the same period over the last 10 years? So when you think of the last 10 years, for Beth Am, it was a great transition. You had a rabbi who was here for 20 years. Then you had, but really he sort of, Rabbi Bookman sort of phased out, because there were like 3 years where he was only here for like half the year, and we were already on, it was a long transition period. And what a lot of synagogues do is they hire an interim. And they say, we're going to hire someone for 1 year, we'll get used to it. But here they said, we've been used to it for 3 years already, let's just get on with it. So when I started thinking about applying here, I called a couple of my professors from rabbinic school, because they're the ones who know about, there are a couple of them who sort of make it their business to know about URJ congregations. They know all the rabbis, they think they know about all of the internal politics, they don't really, in retrospect, don't know anything about it. And one of them said to me, don't go there. Actually, two of them said to me, don't go there. I said, why? They said, because you're going to be the unwitting interim. You're going to go there for a year. They're still going to be used to the other guy. And, that's not the kind of situation you want to go into if they don't have an interim first, because what an interim does is it lays the groundwork for a new settled rabbi, what they call a settled rabbi. So what I tell my professors, you don't understand how good I am. No, no. I mean, to a certain extent, I believed in myself, but I also said, too good a chance to pass up. Too good an opportunity. I bet on myself. I'm going to give it a shot. I don't care what you say. I'm going. And, so that's what happened. Now, when I got here, I didn't really know what vision was. I knew it would be good if you had one, but I didn't really know exactly what it was. And a couple of things that I tried right off the bat were complete flops. Well, really one thing that I tried to do right off the bat was a complete flop. Although it ended up becoming worthwhile in the end, but it didn't work out. I don't know if any of you know about this plan that I had, but I'll tell you what it was and tell you how to do it. So this is, because when I got here, I was concerned that people would say, it's great that you're here and all, but what's your vision for us? Where are you going to go? And I didn't have one. I didn't have a vision because I didn't know anyone yet. And it took me about 4 to 5 years to figure out how Beth Am worked. And there were multiple times where I said to myself, I think I understand this place now. And then something would happen and I'd say, I don't understand this place at all. Like, what is this place? So when I first got here, my kids were in went into the day school, first grade and fourth grade. So I knew my son would have, a pretty good run, first, second, third, fourth, fifth grade. And my daughter would only have fourth and fifth grade. And I thought, okay, this is ridiculous. Why would we only go to fifth grade? Why don't we go to eighth grade? And then, once you ask that question, you get all the answers, why not? And there are a lot of good answers, why not? And in truth, it wouldn't work. So I had another idea. How are we going to continue the Jewish education of our kids here if we can't have 6th, 7th, and 8th grade? And I came up with an idea. And the idea was, formal education works a lot better than informal education. When you force the kids to learn it because they're grade dependent on it, they'll learn it. If you tell them to come once a week for 2 hours on a Sunday when they're half asleep, and they're not graded on it, it's a little tougher to transmit the information. So every once in a while, a parent will come to me and say, my son's bored in Hebrew school. Can you make it more fun? And I say to them, do you tell your kid's science teacher to make it more fun? He thinks chemistry is boring, so could you blow something up once in a while? What? Learning isn't always that easy. Yeah, of course. Learning letters and little symbols and stuff isn't always that fun. But do you want to learn Hebrew or not? Okay, there's only so fun you could make it. And you can make it. But is learning Hebrew vowels going to be like, going to Disney World? No. Okay, fine. But I figured if we could formalize it, we could do better. So I came up with an idea to talk to the local private schools, because it's illegal to do it with the public schools. But to talk to the local private schools and see if they would create a track in their school where they could continue the Jewish education curriculum here, there. And we would, send teachers, and we would send our rabbis to Gulliver and to Ransom and to Riviera and stuff. And if you went to that school, and if you wanted, you could take the Jewish education track, and you'd have 2 or 3 electives a year on Judaism. And originally everyone thought it was a terrible idea. But eventually, I got Gulliver to agree to it. And Riviera was about to agree to it also. Riviera, even at one point, we're talking about building a new building just for it. And they said, what's in it for us? I said, how about every Jewish kid in town? We're your best students anyway. And this was before the boom. This was pre-COVID, where there were spaces in these schools. Now, they don't need anything from anybody. You can't, Ken Griffin can't get his kids in. But back then, there were still spaces in schools. So they thought about it, and Gulliver was actually going to do it. And their head of school, who I became good friends with, agreed to it. And then their board said no. Because then they said, well, we're going to have to do it for the Muslims, and we're going to have to do it for the Hindus. And I said, really, you think a lot of Hindus? All right, whatever. I said, we're a Jewish school right across the street from you. Most of our kids go to your school anyway. Okay, whatever, it didn't work. And I spent a year and a half trying to figure that out. And it would have been amazing, but it didn't work. And I gave up. So why did I give up? Because right as the time that I was about sort of done with that, someone came to me and said, forget them. Why don't we build here? Okay. How much you need? 55 million. What? Now, when I was in Fort Myers, we once had a fundraiser called the Fruits of Israel Festival. I said, let's have a Fruits of Israel Festival. I didn't even know what that was. And we had it, and it was pretty dumb. I don't know. I honestly, to this day, don't even know what it was. We made about $18,000. But we spent about 17. So we ended, but I did get a sponsor, and I think I ended up ultimately at one point we raised like 15 grand. And that was the most money that I ever raised in my life. And 15 grand at the time was like so much money, we didn't even know how to spend it. It was like, by the time we finished Beyond the Curve, I was like, I'm not even getting out of bed unless it's $150,000. Because when you need to raise 55 million, you need big numbers, and you need a lot of them. Although we got every size, and we did it. But from that point forward, I started to understand what vision was. Not because I really knew what it was, but because I had really smart people who were members of the congregation mentor me and pull me along and teach me how to raise money, because I had no idea how to do it. The first solicitation I did was with this one family. We asked them for a lot of money, but I didn't ask for the money. We just sort of did the presentation, and then I said, what do you think? So Steve Bykowski, who was the guy, our consultant who was mentoring me, the family left the room. He looked at me and he said, what the hell are you doing? I said, I have no idea. So we went through about 20 of those. And, then we'd go back into my office and he'd tell me how I did. And slowly we got better, and slowly we got better, and slowly we got better. And by the end, we had it down. And it was just taking checks, and we paid for the buildings. What happened in between there, though, was COVID. And part of our story over the last 10 years was COVID. And, think about it. You would have been terrified to walk in this room just like this. Even when the vaccines, we'd with masks, and you'd sit here and you'd sit there, and there'd be a guy back there, and everyone would go home and wonder if this was their last class. I don't know if I'm going to make it because that guy coughed, and it was terrifying. So I had a moment when it was March 2020, and I'd just gotten back from the APAC Policy Conference, which turned out to be the last of the big APAC Policy Conference, 18,000 people. Now in February 2020, COVID wasn't really, it was in China. When they asked Trump, why do you keep calling it the China? Because it comes from China. Right. By the way, I saw this video. You remember the band REM?
Of course.
If you ever listen to their songs, Losing My Religion, and you listen to Michael Stipe singing, and you close your eyes and imagine that it's Donald Trump singing, it sounds just like him. It's something to do for fun if you have nothing to do later. But amazing. So I listened, I'm like, oh my God, it sounds just like Donald Trump. So at that APAC policy conference, it turned out that a bunch of people were infected. And I came home saying, that guy that was standing next to me in the restroom, the guy I was sitting by at lunch, maybe it was him. There were 18,000 people there. And I'm thinking, but it was a few people from New Rochelle, New York. And everyone has a thing that says their name and where they're from. So I'm thinking, oh my God. At the third plenary session, I sat next to a guy from New Rochelle. I'm calling my doctor, what do I do? Because this is, vaccines weren't even like a thing. Nobody even knew what it was. So then, the night that it really was like breaking here, and everyone was scared, was the night that we were it was a Thursday night, and we were having our day school auction, which is like our biggest event of the year. And everybody's coming, and people are calling me and saying how you guys are so selfish, how dare you have this event. So Bob Hirsch, if you don't know, used to be our executive director for many years, and he was the executive director when I got here. We're sitting in his office with a couple other lay leaders. I forgot who else was there. And it was like, what do we do? And all of a sudden, it just hit me. And I said, we're going to have this event because these day school parents have worked so hard on it, and we don't really know what's going on. We're going to have this event, and then we're closing. And as of tomorrow, we're a virtual temple. He said, well, what about the school? I said, closed. We'll figure it out. And they'd already been working on how to do virtual school, and it was already a thing. So, but I remember just saying to Bob Hirsch, that's it, shut it down. And I only had one guiding principle for all of COVID for Beth Am. And when I was in third grade, I went to a really small Jewish school. There were like 120 kids in the whole school. You know, my class was like 7 kids. And so everyone knew everyone very well. And I had a friend who was in 5th grade. I think I was in 3rd and he was in 5th, or I was in 2nd and he was in 4th. His name was Jonathan Kaiser, and he got some weird virus and he died. And, you know, it was like devastating for the whole community. And I said to Bob Hirsch, no kids die. That's nothing else, just nothing else matters. I don't care if these kids have speech impediments for the rest of their lives. Moses made it through with a speech impediment. They'll figure it out. No kids die. That's it. That's our only guiding principle. And so we said, shut it down. And we had no idea what we were doing, what we were talking about. Pretty quickly, though, we put together a great COVID task force and so forth, and then we're off and running. Okay, I want to talk, though, about, hopefully you'll think this is interesting, maybe you will, maybe you won't. But I want to talk about how politics and who the president has been over my time here has affected life. Okay. So it worked out really well for me in the beginning because I was in Fort Myers for 8 years. And in Fort Myers, there's no Democrats. There's no such thing. In fact, when I came here, one of my friends, Alan Shivak, Alav Shalom, he said to me, "You're going to Miami?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "The Democrats." What, you know. That was an actual conversation? I said, "I don't care, as long as they're Zionist." But, you know, everyone over there hated Obama, and so did I. So I felt fine, because I didn't think he wasn't nearly pro-Israel enough for me. Then I came here, and everyone hated Trump, and so did I, and everything was fine. Not everyone. But then he had a second act, and he bombed Iran, and I changed my mind. So, but when I first got here, Trump was a new kind of thing. We never had anything like this. And there were all these calls. Every time he would do something, different, everyone wanted to put out a statement. And finally I got to the point where he said, "Listen, he's going to do what he's going to do." But one thing I really don't like are statements. Sometimes you have to do them. But if you maybe you've noticed, we don't do them that much anymore. And we try to only do them when they, affect the Jewish world. Sometimes you have to. Sometimes something so terrible or something so crazy happens, you have to. But we try not to. And I don't know if you noticed or not, but the first probably 6 or 7 years that I was here, I didn't say a word about politics. Nothing. I don't know if you noticed that or not. And I took a lot of heat for it. Because from both sides. How could you not say he's crazy? How could you not say he's the greatest? How could you not say... And he's not even Jewish. What do I care? This isn't a political institution. It's a Jewish spiritual institution. And I, in no way, became a rabbi for politics. Now, that changed a little bit through my history, and I want to tell you a little story about that. So, about now, I'm trying to think how long I've been here. You don't have to be an idiot. It's 10 years. Maybe 15 years ago, I was very unhappy with the Federation of Fort Myers and Fort Myers in general because they weren't doing enough Israel advocacy for me. I wanted to see a lot more. And this was in the easy days when people liked us. When you go to Democrats and Republicans and they all loved Israel. I have a friend, one of my best friends from college, his job is he does advertising for political candidates. And so I told him I went to meet with, I think, Ballart. Remember that guy, Mario Diaz-Balart? We went to lobby him on Israel. And he had a picture in his office of him and Ariel Sharon. So I told my friend, this guy's really pro-Israel. He's got a picture of him and Ariel Sharon in his office. And he said to me, of course he does. He takes it out every time you come and sticks it right there. As soon as you leave. They got one for whoever's coming. Oh, yeah, after Mandela, whoever. So I called in 4 people to come meet with me, who I knew were really active in the Israel advocacy world. And I brought them into the library of our temple of Fort Myers, and I said, we got to do something. What can we do? Now, I don't know if I ever told you about my friend Paul Simcoe. Did I ever tell you about Paul, Holocaust survivor? Some of you may have heard this. I only have so many stories. But did I ever tell you about he was from Vienna? Let me just tell you the story real quick. Paul became one of my closest friends in Fort Myers. You know it? Okay, so maybe one person hasn't heard it. It'll take up some time. So, he was born in Vienna. He was attacked on Kristallnacht. He was like 10 years old. He was beaten up. And the one thing he remembered about it was there was a police officer watching and laughing as he was being, and he remembered that image. His family ended up getting out, and they escaped to Bolivia. And actually, there was a story where it was his father's birthday, and his father had a cake. That's what they do in Vienna. They have like fancy cakes. And he was walking home. He came to his building. The building was all Jews. And there were Nazis standing guard. And his father said, it's my birthday. We're having a party. You guys are welcome to come up and join us. So they came up. He walks into the apartment. They see these 2 Nazis. The Nazis sit down. They take their big hats and put them. He gives them cake. And he starts cracking Jewish jokes to ingratiate them. The rest of the building, the Nazi tapped him on the shoulder, his father, and said, you're okay, you stay here. The rest of the building was sent to Dachau. And they survived. They ended up going to Bolivia. And he never had any education. He was in 7th grade when they left Vienna. Ended up escaping to Bolivia. And at one point, there was a member of the Israeli, like an ambassador of the Israeli government, but not officially, who was doing a tour, going around and giving lectures, this young kid. And they told my friend Paul, you're going to be the one to pick him up and take him to the airport and show him around. And that young kid who he was taking around, his name was Bibi Netanyahu. And he gave him a tour. Many, many years later, Paul became a very big giver to AIPAC, and he met Bibi. And he said to him, you remember, I'm that kid who took you around in Bolivia. And Bibi said, okay, whatever. And he kept walking. And Bibi kept walking, and Paul said, you forgot to tip me. And Bibi started laughing and came back and gave him a big hug. Paul, eventually, they made it to Argentina. And he grew up, very smart guy, got a job in a rubber factory. And he was a native German speaker, but he picked up Spanish. And there was another native German speaker who was also there, but didn't really pick up Spanish. And whenever they were in meetings together, the other guy leaned on Paul because his Spanish wasn't very good, so he asked him to translate for him in German. So one day I'm playing golf with Paul. He was, he died a few years ago. He was like 94, 95 years old. But we played golf at the same place. He played golf because he lived there, and I played golf because it was the only place in town that had free membership for clergy. So we ended up playing at the same club. It's called The Forest. Great place. And one day I'm out there, and I said, hey, were you in Argentina when they caught Eichmann? And he looked at me like I was from Mars. I said, what do you mean? He said, I'm from Vienna. I said, what? I thought you were from Buenos Aires. I thought he was born in Buenos Aires. So he tells me this whole story. And he said, you asked me if I was there when they caught Eichmann. You know the guy who didn't speak Spanish very well? Was Eichmann. Wow. He worked with him. Wow. He didn't know who he was. He's a Holocaust survivor. He didn't know who he was. He knew him. Can you believe that? So Paul told me he didn't believe in God. Never missed a Friday night service. Never. And you ask him, why do you come on Fridays? Why do you fast on Yom Kippur? He said, because that's what Jews do, and I'm a Jew. But he lost his faith in God. But because of what he saw, he became very hardcore AIPAC, political advocacy. So he said to me, we should do AIPAC. Okay, fine. And that was my entree into because he said, this is what I think you should do. I said, okay. I went to my first AIPAC policy conference in D.C. I was by myself. There were like 15,000 people there. I called my mom. I'm telling her about it. She said, are you lonely? I said, lonely. I found my people. This is the least lonely I've ever felt in my entire life. And ever since then, so before I got here, this was an AIPAC congregation. They had plenty of AIPAC type, speeches. And their rule was, if you had a Republican, you had to have a Democrat. And we haven't broken that rule. We've never, since I've been here, had a Republican without a Democrat or a Democrat without a Republican. In fact, we hardly had anyone. I mean, we've had lower positions, like Nikki Fried, when she was... yeah, but she wasn't like running for national positions. Now, we haven't done... I think maybe we had Ileana Ross-Layton in once or something, but she was already retired, and, she was a Republican, but she was out, it wasn't so partisan. She wasn't partisan at all when she was talking about Israel. So my feeling all along has been, even in what I think has been one of the rockiest and most bizarre 11 years of American political history that there's been, we've tried to stay out of it. Now, that doesn't mean we don't advocate for certain policies. There's certain things that, but it's not really what our mission is. And so what I just tried to do is show you how Beth Am has dealt with maybe the last 11 years, but I want to say something even another layer on top of that, which is what happened to the Reform movement over that same period of time. So I wish I had a board. The one. Whereas, if this is the left wing, and this is the right wing, and, this is the center, we've tried to stay right here and focus on our mission, which is building the greatest Jewish community in the world and the most pro-Israel Jewish community in the world, and focus on peoplehood and our values. While we've tried to do that, the country has become more and more polarized to the point where almost not even talking to each other. The Reform movement's reaction has been, now, if this is where Beth Am is, the Reform movement was like here. But over the last 11 years, I'll be back in like an hour. And by the way, the conservative movement and the Reconstructionist movement, same thing. To the point where, you know what J Street is? So J Street, which is like the opposite of AIPAC, they're having their convention in March. Who are the keynote speakers? Al Sharpton, the president of the Reform movement, and the president of the conservative movement. Rick Jacobs and Jacob Blumenthal. And Al Sharpton. Those are their keynote speakers. So, the movements have made themselves left-wing politics first, spirituality a far second. To the point where if you're not interested in that political stuff, you have no connection with the movement. And we have almost no connection with the movement. But not only that, you'd be hard-pressed to find any senior rabbi of any major or large congregation in the United States that does feel that their congregation has a connection with the Reform movement, and it's worse in the conservative movement. That's what's happened over the last 10 to 12 years. And the shame of that is, yeah.
What does it mean? What does it mean a congregation having a relationship, a connection to the movement? How would it show up?
Okay, very good question. Let me say one more thing and then answer the question. It's an excellent question. What made American Judaism succeed and why the Reform movement and the conservative movement were so successful was because of the strength of their institutions. Now, what are the institutions? The rabbinic schools, the camp system, the URJ, which is the Union for Reform Judaism, used to be called the UAHC, now it's the URJ, Union for Reform Judaism, and the CCAR, which is the Rabbinic Union. There's also a cantorial union called the ACC. What would you get as a congregation from the movement? Educational materials, curriculum, for your Hebrew schools, for your Sunday school, for your religious school, sending your kids to their camps. Right, qualified professionals to be your cantors and your rabbis and your educators and so forth. A magazine, a website, a movement, camaraderie, but they also had regional directors in all over the country. And the regions of the country had connections, had conventions, had what they called kalot, had things in common, did things together, had the biennial. I mean, they're bringing the biennial back, but it's a shell of itself, meaning an every other year national convention, and a feeling that you were all working towards the same mission. Right? None of that exists anymore. The camps are not producing students who want to be rabbis or cantors. And so because of that, we have a shortage of rabbis and cantors, a terrible shortage of rabbis and cantors, almost impossible to find one. In fact, if you find a good one, you should, because there's nothing else out there. You know, there's no intellectual product. There's no great books and thinking being done and being written. The movement can barely sustain itself. The camps are running because they're fun camps, but they're not producing Jews who are interested in Jewish leadership. Some of them are doing better than others. Some of them are doing actually okay, but all the ones they had on leadership, like this camp called Camp Kutz in New York, where all the leaders went, they closed it. And what's the result of that? The rabbinic school that had 3 campuses now only has 2. They closed the main center in Cincinnati. It no longer exists. The union doesn't have regions anymore. It doesn't have a magazine. It doesn't put out worthwhile scholarly literature. And its leadership isn't at all interested in spiritual pursuit. It's only interested in far left politics. And it's the same thing in the conservative movement, and the Reconstructionist movement has adopted anti-Zionism. Adopted it. Anti-Zionism. I mean, now, this is the state of what's happening for whatever reason. Now, part of it is an overreaction to Trump, which has been going on for 10, 11 years. But this is even, this goes back further than that, but part of it's an overreaction to Trump. And the leadership of the Reform movement and conservative movement and Reconstructionist movement sees itself as like the last bastion of morality. You know, that they're fighting this cause. And if you disagree with them, they think you're from the moon. They think that you don't get it. Now, part of the problem is that all of that leadership lives in the same block of Manhattan. And they see the whole world as Manhattan. And we're sitting here in Miami saying we don't have anything in common with you. I had a friend who's a rabbi who works for the movement who said to me, look, I didn't vote for Mamdani. But we gave it a real, we really had to hash it out. And we, like bragging that I didn't vote for Mamdani easily. I had to really think about it. And I'm like, what? And convincing me, she's telling me that she loves Israel, that her daughters have Hebrew names, that she's been to Israel as many times as me, which she hasn't, and all these bona fides about her Zionism. And I said to her, you may think you're Zionist. You may be Zionist. But you know who doesn't think you're Zionist? Real Zionists. Because I spend a lot of time with AIPAC, AJC, Israel Bonds, Magen David Adom, Hatzalah, Federation, Zionist spaces. And if you said this crap to them, they would say you're not Zionist. So you might think you're Zionist, but the Zionists don't. So what's going to be the reaction? With all of that I just said as a framework, comes October 7th. All of that happened before October 7th. I mean, it's still happening, but all of that was building and building and building before October 7th. Comes October 7th, and what do we find out? That just as Israel was unprepared for Hamas's attack, so too the American Jewish community was unprepared to deal with the avalanche of anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism and hate that we took here. So who do you look to? If you're a Jew in America and you look for leadership, who do you look to? The people who are soft on anti-Semitism. The people who are looking around the world and saying, hey, wait a minute. LGBTQ, liberal this, liberal that. You're our friends. We've been working with you. And now you hate us? They were so shell-shocked because they've been living in that left-wing space, and then it was that very group that turned on them. Now, do we have huge problems with the far right? Yeah, of course. But the truth is that the far right problems, and Tucker Carlson and Candace P.L. Owens, they didn't start coming out of the woodwork until recently. The first couple years of October 7th, it was almost entirely left-wing hate. Now, was there plenty of right-wing hate? Always. Don't get me wrong. Both fringes are always bad. And it's coming big time from both sides. But don't worry, I have TikTok now. I mean, I'm holding them back. Almost all of the Jews in Pinecrest agree with me that anti-Semitism is bad. I haven't reached anybody else, but so now we see two things. One, we have to reevaluate what is Jewish leadership in America. And two, we have to reconcile that we weren't prepared at all for October 7th, and the BDS pro-Palestinian people have been preparing for October 7th for 30 years for this war that we didn't know we were in until October 7th. And so when they showed up at Columbia on October 8th, and they all had the same tents. Really? They all went to the exact same store and all about the same? They were prepared. They were ready. They knew this was coming. And we're running around thinking, wait a minute. Our leaders, half of them are in those tents. So now we have a real problem. And there is right now a vacuum in American Jewish leadership. Who become our heroes? Comedians? Michael Rappaport? I mean, he's coming here, but he's a comedian. He curses every other word. which is fine, and it's fun, and it's entertaining, but he's no Martin Luther King. Lizzie Savetsky, she's great, but she's also a bikini model, which doesn't offend me. Right? Yeah. Some people say, look, I was with a group of women, they said, look, I like listening to her on Israel, but then she mixes in these bikini pictures. I said, I live with it. It's, it's fine. But those are our heroes. Our heroes should have been the head of the Reform movement, the head of the conservative movement, the head of JNF, the head of Federation. Where are they? People don't even know who they are. And I think it's because they lack moral clarity. And they found themselves in a quandary that, now, this is my own opinion. I mean, obviously, you could take it or leave it. All of this is my own opinion. You might walk out here and say, I have no idea what he's talking about, but this is what I've seen. They couldn't define for themselves morality versus moral clarity. You know what the difference is between morality and moral clarity? Morality is 67,000 Palestinians were killed. The ones who were innocent, 2/3 of them were Hamas terrorists. But, the 20,000 innocent people who died, that's terrible. Feel terrible for them. If you don't, then you're immoral. No problem. That's moral versus immoral. If you're going to come out and say 20,000 kids deserve to die, then you're a bad person. That's disgusting. That's morality versus immorality. What's moral clarity? Moral clarity is, if you don't destroy Hamas, the Palestinians have no future. By the way, if you ask any Gazan right now, who's making your life miserable? It's not Israel. There's a ceasefire. Israelis aren't even there. They're still just as miserable. Why not? Why are they still so miserable? Because Hamas wouldn't do a damn thing to lift a finger for one Gazan. All they want to do is rearm and keep fighting. They could get billions and billions of dollars from the whole world to rebuild Gaza. Why aren't they doing it? Because the world knows, why should we send in money to build more buildings that Israel's just going to bomb, because they're going to keep fighting. Hamas doesn't care one iota about Gazans. And now, they really don't have Israel to blame for it because the Israelis aren't there. Where's the camping at Columbia and Harvard and so forth? So, moral clarity is, Hamas is evil. And just like the Nazis are evil. Do you want to get rid of the Nazis and some civilians are going to die, unfortunately? Or leave them there? So good, those 20,000 innocent people could still be alive, but Hamas could still be there and the Palestinians have absolutely no future. Or you can root out the evil and try to build something better. To me, that's moral clarity. But the leadership in the American Jewish community, they didn't have any moral clarity, and we really suffered for it. So what I'm trying to do is find like-minded rabbis who agree with me to build a consortium. But what's interesting about this consortium is, the one thing we've noticed through all of this is that the difference between Reform and conservative Jews has totally changed. The conversation has totally changed. And if you were going to start movements again today, you wouldn't start them based on mitzvah observance. Because the mitzvah observance of conservative Jews and Reform Jews is pretty similar. And pretty weak, but also pretty similar. How would you organize synagogues today? Zionist versus not Zionist. Or proudly Zionist versus lukewarm Zionist. And there are rabbis today who are saying, we're going to not leave our movements because who cares? Why should we start a fuss? We don't really, it's not so expensive anymore anyway. Give them a few $1,000 and we're part of the movement. But in the meantime, we're going to create a consortium of Reform and conservative, and maybe even some modern Orthodox synagogues that are Zionist and want to be together and do things together. That could happen. Yeah. So,
I know a prominent, very prominent conservative rabbi who will do Jewish baby names without circumcision.
yeah.
It means horrendous. So how do you change that whole teaching approach or philosophy within the rabbinical schools? And it's just as bad in the seminary as it is in the HEC.
Well, halakhically and in terms of mitzvah observance, I'm not sure. Because I only know about the reform movement. But, I mean, I don't really know what's going on at JTS. But what people are talking about, what I do know across the movements, is Zionist perspective. So the Reconstructionist movement, I sit on the board of the CCAR. I'm the vice president of the CCAR, which is the Reform Rabbinic Board. And anytime a rabbi wants to seek membership in the CCAR board, we have to approve it, so we vote on it. And we've gotten tons of rabbis who are in the Reconstructionist movement who are leaving to join us because they can't stand the anti-Zionism in the Reconstructionist movement. Reconstructionist movement is gone. Their rabbinic school, which used to be a very, very good rabbinic school in Philadelphia, is become anti-Zionist. Now, in conservative and reform, it's not, the professors aren't the problem. It's not like Yale, where the professors are the problem. It's the students. And what's happened is, and this is one of the most damning things I could say about the leadership of our movements. The type of people who are becoming rabbis are not becoming rabbis because they're spiritually elevated and interested in a spiritual life because they were inspired by someone in the camp system the way it used to be, or in their synagogue or whatever. There are people who see it as a way to use it as a platform for their left-wing politics. And so those are the kinds of people coming to rabbinic school, and when they get there, they're anti-Zionist. And every student rabbi that I have known over the last few years has told me that it's uncomfortable to be at Hebrew Union College, the Reform Rabbinic School, as a Zionist. And in fact, when they give pro-Zionist sermons, their friends walk out. So let me say one last thing. So we had a bunch of rabbis get together and talk to the president of Hebrew Union College. And he used to be a lot more reasonable. And we said to him, by the way, he's not a rabbi. He's a very smart guy. He was a professor at WashU. And at one point he was the head of the Jewish Federation in St. Louis. He's a real scholar. He has a PhD, WashU, a serious institution. But we said, what is going on? How can you send us rabbis that are anti-Zionist? And he said, I am not going to hold Zionism as a litmus test for admission into this school. And, 10 years ago, before October 7th, said, yeah, whatever. Now we say, what? And he tells us, his response is, we're the outliers. The majority of the reform movement agrees with him. And they may, I don't know. But let me just say one final point. What has become over the last 10 years is that one of the major differences between not Reform and conservative rabbis or their institutions, but Reform and conservative Jews, and not in Miami, because Miami is Zionist more than anyone. Miami's a different story. But the level of Zionism is what generally is distinguishing now conservative synagogues and Reform synagogues. That's like the distinguishing factor. And so my point is that over the last 10 years, we've sort of changed the differences from Reform and conservative to where you stand on Israel. And my final point then is, with all of that going on, it's been my mission to keep us politically centered and not get into it, but be unabashedly pro-Zionist at every turn. And that's, I think, the formula for growing synagogues. And the truth is that you will not find a Jewish organization anywhere in the world that's growing that's not Zionist. There's none.
So I'm kind of, when you were saying about the students, about being honest, it kind of hit me so appalling. I can understand Jews who are not educated Jewishly. It could be PhDs in all kind of things, but not have Jewish education, don't know the history. so they don't know the connection, they weren't brought up, but people who are who see themselves as future leaders of a Jewish institution, to not believe that a Jewish state
Right.
is something that is, I don't even know, a word that is inclusive, that is so strong to say that it is one of the foundational things of being Jewish is so remote.
So I'll tell you that there were leaders of the Reform movement who put an article in, I think it was the Washington Post, might have been the Times, but one of the big newspapers, that said, how can we stand by as, Reform rabbis while Israel's starving the Gazans? And the whole time, I argued that there's no starvation. And there was no starvation. And if there was, it's because Hamas stole 85% of the aid.
But it really doesn't matter.
But hang on, I'll answer the question. So the reason, though, when they were asked why they did that, when they were asked why they put that article in, because this is not true. We can prove that it's not true. Israel has proven that it's not true. And they said, you don't understand. We're trying to keep the Lutherans and the Methodists from deserting the Jews. So we had to throw them a bone to show. So that's what you call the definition of a lack of moral clarity and a lack of leadership. And that's what happened to our leadership. They're so closely aligned with the left that they had to throw them bones to say, look, I'm a good Jew. I'm not that hardcore Zionist Jew. I'm the type of Jew that criticizes Israel. And I'm standing over here saying, we're at war. What the hell's wrong with you? But that's what happened.
And there are plenty of things to criticize Israel as a state.
Of course.
But to look at Israel, whether it should exist or not as a Jewish state, based on policy,
Yeah.
do you judge any other, so it's, as I said in the beginning, for somebody who is an ignorant,
Right.
it's one thing, but for people who want to aspire to be rabbis.
Right. Nobody criticizes Israel more than Israelis. Israelis, it's the national pastime. If you don't wake up and have something terrible to say about the government, they could take away your passport, right? You could lose your citizenship. They live for it. But they're talking about issues that we don't even know are happening over here. What we're talking about is supporting the state and its right to exist, not Bibi's policies. And you want to hate Bibi. What does the matter? Bibi had nothing to do with how much humanitarian aid was going. I mean, the whole thing was ridiculous. But the lack of moral clarity was extremely painful. And I remember saying, I had two cousins in Gaza fight. At one point during the war, I had two cousins fighting in Gaza. And when I heard people saying, Bibi's killing innocent Palestinians, I said, really? You think my two cousins, who should be in graduate school right now, should be getting married and starting a business right now, who are in the mud in Gaza, are looking around shooting innocent Palestinian children? You think that's what those Israeli kids are doing? Are you crazy? But that's what people thought. And it was utter nonsense. Yeah.
Does anyone ask the simplest of all questions? What would happen if Israel falls? And that's it. They're not there anymore.
Yeah.
What do you think will happen to the rest of the world's opinion of Jews or movement?
I'll tell you what. Let's end on a positive note. Did any of you hear the story about the message the two-word message that the Mossad sent to to MI6 or MI5, whatever their Mossad is? MI5. Anyone hear the story? So you remember when all those countries were say we're going to recognize a Palestinian state? By the way, whatever happened to that? Remember they all said we're going to recognize a Palestinian state? England and France and Australia. So what happened? This is a true story. I heard this from an Israeli general. You never heard this story? The Mossad sent a The Mossad sent a 2-word message to MI5. You know what MI5 is? It's the CIA of England. You know James Bond? They sent a 2-word message. The message was game over. That's it, game over. What did that mean? It meant that Israel would no longer going to share intelligence with England. What happened? At 10 Downing Street, World War III. The entire intelligence apparatus and every general in England showed up at 10 Downing Street and said, we cannot function without their intelligence. Our entire country will start blowing up if we don't have that intelligence. You got to get rid of this nonsense. And that was it. And what did the CIA say? CIA said if Israel failed, if Israel was gone, if there was no Mossad, America would have to create 5 agencies the size of the CIA to replace it. Israel for the West, whether they want to admit it or not, France, England, Germany, America, Canada, whether they want to admit it or not, are dependent on Israel to survive. Think about that. They are dependent on Israel for their intelligence. And if Israel failed, they would have to create one and fight themselves against the Arabs. They would rather have the Israelis fight the Arabs and get all that intelligence for free. And we're living in a world, I wish my great-grandfather, I wish I could have said this at Auschwitz. We're living in a world where Israel is the 8th strongest country in the world and is too big to fail. And let me just say this to end. What you noticed during the 12-day war with Iran, Russia and China said to Iran, if I were you, I'd knock it off because you're not winning and we're not coming to help you. We have no interest in helping you. Why? Because what do Russia and China want with radical terror? They don't want that either. We're not fighting war on behalf of radical terror. We're not getting into that. We're not taking on the West for you for that. And Iran saw that it was by itself. And now that Iran is about to fall, anti-Zionism no longer exists. Because anti-Zionism is the belief that you could destroy Israel. There are no forces in the world that have the desire or the ability to destroy Israel. And if anti-Zionism is no longer in existence, then all you have is what's left, which is what anti-Zionism was originally, which is anti-Semitism. That's all that's left. The war against anti-Semitism is raging, but the war to destroy Israel is over. The Arab-Israeli conflict is over. Think about what happened on October 7th. When Iran gave Hamas the green light on October 7th, and Hamas attacked, at that moment that they attacked, they declared the destruction of the Houthis, Hamas, Hezbollah, Syria, and now Iran. They destroyed themselves in the same way that Haman did when he declared that he was going to kill the Jews. And if you don't see the divinity in that, but that's why you come to Temple Beth Ham, not for the politics, for the divinity. So that's it. That's 10 years. All right.
Wow.